My roommate was out of the house for the week, so I had the place to myself. It was spring break, so my college classes were out too. I had no plans and really nothing I needed to do. On Monday, I was basically trapped inside due to the huge storm blowing through our city. This was common around this time of the year, but it still always seems worse every time. Every time the trees looked like they were gonna blow away, and the house would shake and crack non-stop. Knowing I wouldn't be able to sleep, I decided to just stay up. I turned on the Xbox and I started up one of my video games. Played for over an hour, probably until 11 o'clock when the doorbell rang. I paused the game and got up. But then I remembered the whole storm and everything. Who would be outside right now? I went over to the front door and looked through the people. Nothing. I opened the door. The wind and water hit me right away, but when I looked around, I didn't see anyone. I closed the door and thought maybe the wind had somehow rang the doorbell. I don't know. It sounds dumb now, but what I was supposed to think. I went back to my game, but only a couple minutes later, I heard a huge crash in the backyard. Stuff tumbling over and breaking. I immediately knew it was our patio furniture that ran over to the back door. Everything was scattered around the yard, blowing around the wind. I quickly put my shoes on and went outside. I started pushing each piece of the furniture up against the back of the house. The wind was so heavy, it would even hurt sometimes when the water would hit my face. I was rushing, going as fast as I could, until I saw someone. They were standing at the edge of the backyard, watching me. I looked back at them for a moment, but then grabbed the last piece of furniture and ran inside to escape the rain. I looked out the back door as I dried off, but the person was gone. Between that and the doorbell ringing, I was a little bit nervous. I sat in the living room, this time just scrolling on my phone, because I was tired of being interrupted. After a while, I struggled to keep my eyes open. I took a blanket and laid down on the couch. I didn't feel like going upstairs, and the storm was much louder upstairs anyway. It took a while, but eventually I drifted into a sleep. A few hours later, still well into the night, I woke up from a sudden burst of heavy wind outside. A few hours later, still well into the night, I woke up from a sudden burst of heavy wind outside, shaking the house. I put the blanket to the side and sat up, moving my feet to the floor. As I prepared to go check if the person outside was still there, but just when my feet touched the floor, they were soaked. It woke me up immediately. I looked down and saw a puddle on the ground, right next to the couch. Then I saw another and another, leading the line across the floor. Inside the puddles were faint, muddy shoe prints. I stood up and ran to the corner of the room. My heart was beating rapidly in my chest. After a minute of hearing nothing but the wind outside, I slowly followed the shoe prints. They led all throughout the house, upstairs and downstairs, but I could clearly tell that they entered through the back door, which I had stupidly forgotten to lock in the rush of getting out of the rain. I locked it and I pulled my phone out to call 911. But then the thought crept into my mind, what if they still inside? I stayed quiet and moved to the corner of the house where I felt the most hidden, and I called 911. I waited in the silence for them to arrive. When they did, they took a look around, seeing everything I saw, but to nothing more. They told me it seemed like a personal attack though, because nothing was missing, and they were clearly focused on my house in particular. However, they walked right up to me while I was sleeping and seemingly did nothing but watch me, which is super creepy, but doesn't make much sense. If they wanted to do something to me, they would have it at the moment. After some thoughts, this had led me to believe that whoever it was had actually come for my roommates. They saw me, then look around the whole house, and then left doing absolutely nothing. So if this was a personal attack and my roommate was there, I think things may have gone a lot worse than they had. I'm 29 and I live along the Appalachian Range in lower West Virginia. I've been going backpacking and camping for years, exploring different trails all around the nearby mountains. My best friend, who lived just a few miles from me, would often join me on these hikes. We usually planned one big trail every year in the fall, lasting anywhere from a few days to a whole week of backpacking and camping. In 2019, we planned to take a trail across the range to a small lake at the top of the mountains. However, in the days leading up to the trip, my friend had to call it off because of an emergency at his work. I'd already taken the whole week off of work and had everything ready to go, so I decided to just go alone. On Monday morning, I drove to a nearby trailhead and I started my route. On Monday morning, I drove to a nearby trailhead and then started my route. This wasn't a regular recreational trail you could typically see on a 4-hour hike. These backpacking trails didn't have a defined path, so you have to use maps, compasses, and landmarks to navigate where you're going. Typically, there's a large landmark in the distance, like a specific rock formation that you hike toward, and when you get there, you could see your next landmark and so on. I spent the first 2 days hiking towards a ridge in the mountains. When it got dark on the second day, I set up camp several hours from reaching the ridge. I pitched a tent and got a fire going on. Then heated up some of my food I brought in my bag. The sun had already set, and it was around 8 o'clock when I laid in my tent to rest and read. I left the fire going, planning to put it out before actually sleeping. 20 minutes into reading, and through the fire crackling outside, I heard the strong sound of a stick snapping right behind my tent. I jolted up, my first thought being a black bear possibly having smelled the food I cooked earlier. I didn't hear anything else though. I crawled out of the tent and shined a flashlight in the tree line behind my tent. Nothing. I called out aggressively to scare away any predators, but again, there were no sign of anything running away. It was really strange, because the sticky snapping was very distinct, definitely being from something I stepped on it. I stayed outside of the tent for a while, looking around constantly before putting out the fire and going inside. I found it really hard to sleep that night because I was so focused on listening for more sounds. In the morning, I was almost surprised to have even slept through the night. I packed my tent and everything else from the campsite, then continued along until I reached the ridge. From there, it was a straight shot to the lake. I was moving fast, trying to get there before dark, so I wouldn't have to move my campsite again the next day. I arrived with about an hour to spare before sunset. The lake was beautiful, very much worth the hike. I walked around it, enjoying the scenery, and pitched a tent and set up my camp on the tree line beside the lake. As I sat by the fire, I kept turning around, hearing soft noises somewhere between the trees behind me. I figured I was just being paranoid, but it was really creepy. It almost sounded exactly like footsteps, but I knew nobody would be out there. I would have seen their tent when I walked around the lake. It was too dark at this point to see anything further than a few feet, so looking around wasn't an option anymore. An hour later, I got in my tent and laid down. Every few minutes, I would hear footsteps again. They were barely too quiet for me to tell for sure what they were though. Eventually, I got so tired that I fell asleep. What I think was only an hour after I fell asleep, I woke up to the sound of someone running away from my tent. I jolted up. I grabbed my flashlight, rushing out of the tent and looking in the direction of footsteps. I saw a bareback of them running away in the distance.